Good evening. Thank you for being here this evening for Basic Buddhist Teachings. And for those of you that were able to join us for Greg Sutton's memorial service, thank you for being there. And I wasn't kidding at the end where I don't know, I don't have anything to speak about yet. Something that does come to mind is today is Rohatsu. We don't have a lot of Buddhist celebrations. It's at least not at Sokokoji. We don't celebrate a lot. We celebrate birthdays, but Rohatsu is the day that commemorates the awakening of the Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree. And this is the first time in 12 or 13 years where we've not been in retreat during Rohatsu. And I'm very glad that we're not in retreat right now because everyone's sick. And this is why we moved Rohatsu to Denkoei in October, because everyone always gets sick. Which is nice too, because if you don't want to sit for 8 days and you know you're going to be sick, just as long as the sickness isn't so bad that you can't enjoy not being in Rohatsu. It's hard to be funny right now. It's always hard to be funny for me. But something about that that event, historical or mythological, or in whatever form it took, the Buddha sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, seems really important because it's not just an event that is singled out in history, but it's an event that is spontaneously occurring. But before the Buddha sat down beneath the Bodhi tree, he did a lot of exploration in his practice. We know about his early path in the palace. Most of us do, where he was surrounded by luxury. He was surrounded by really indulgence, food, women, pleasure. And his father kept from him anything that was unpleasant to look at: sickness, old age, death, the three marks. And it's said that when Gautama left the palace and he saw these marks, he did not see how he could continue to live the way he was living, knowing that suffering was an inevitable part of life, that sickness, aging, and death were inevitable. So he set out to see the truth for himself. And he went through so many iterations of that, and the most extreme being a form of asceticism, where if we see images of the ascetic Buddha, it's basically a skeleton with rags. The Buddha deprived himself of food, of water, of shelter, of laying down, sitting on rocks, sitting on thorns. And it's said just before Rohatsu, a young girl found him sick, near death, and she offered him either rice milk, or some say rice pudding or rice porridge, but something to give him a little bit of sustenance. And he made a small seed of kusa grass, and he vowed to himself that I'll sit beneath this Bodhi tree until I see the truth. And so traditionally on Rohatsu, you would sit through the 3 periods of the night. And the story goes that over the course of those 3 periods of the night, the Buddha was tempted 3 times by the daughters of Mara, until finally he was confronted by Mara, which is the image, the archetype of temptation, passion, aggression, and ignorance, samsara. And the Buddha said, Mara said, who bears witness to this realization? And the Buddha simply touched the earth. And this gesture, I think, is really important because it wasn't a verbal response. And of course, we don't know what happened, and it could be a completely fabricated story, but that imagery of just a gesture, the Buddha touched the earth, really ties into our roots of Zen practice, a transmission that's said to be beyond scripture. The first Zen transmission is said to be between the Buddha and Mahakasyapa. The Buddha held up a flower, Mahakasyapa smiled. And so in our practice, the way in which our practice clarifies over time, it does not clarify in distilling down into concepts. The Buddha had nothing to say about his realization. He made a gesture. He touched the earth. He acknowledged that just this. Mahakasyapa didn't have to say something for the Buddha to recognize his realization. He just had to smile because he recognized what was in front of him. So in our practice, as we look into this path and things seem to become more complicated, our mind stream seems to become more complicated because we stop protecting it so much. It becomes more raw, it becomes very exposed, very, very delicate, reactive, sensitive, painful. That our practice is not to distill this down so that we have something to say about it. In fact, we may find ourselves more and more speechless around what we're looking at or around what we're seeing. And I would encourage you, as I've been encouraged by Sokuzan, that there is no need to resolve what appears to be discord. There's no need to resolve which seems to be a discrepancy. The only way a discrepancy can arise is when we hold a standard in opposition to what is occurring. And to see what is occurring is not to see one side or the other. It's not just that the opposition dissolves and that we see the truth in front of us, but in the midst of that duality, without getting rid of either one, the resolution isn't they're coming together, it's that they don't need to do anything. That the very antagonism and the receptor of the antagonism never have to shift into something else. The Buddha seemed to acknowledge this simply by touching the earth. I feel that gesture is incredibly deep in the sense that it acknowledges something that we're sitting on right now. It wasn't the world of 2,500 years ago, but instantaneously the Buddha acknowledged and recognized realization as a fundamental situation, touched the earth. Most of us aren't so lucky as to see a flower and smile, though. Or if we do, it's kind of cute. We sometimes try to imitate Zen, and we think we're quite clever because we can do so. I say we, I just mean me. I don't know about the rest of you. But the path the Buddha taught, that you could say culminates in Rohatsu, is the middle way. The Buddha had indulged. The Buddha had indulged in asceticism. So food, wealth, women, enjoyment, pleasure, indulging, and asceticism, indulging. And he prescribed the middle way. But what's interesting is that the middle way is not splitting the difference. It's not splitting the difference between asceticism and indulgence. The middle way is incredibly personal. Some of us have a natural inclination towards asceticism. It's just a simple life. And some people may look upon that and say, that needs to be modified. They're so austere, instead of seeing that's just simply what arises naturally. Some of us like things. I've been bragging. I bought my first TV. I've been talking about it all week. I bought my first TV, really big, and I like it. David Attenborough looks amazing on it. Hartman looks amazing on it. Everything looks amazing on it. And so instead of trying to navigate the middle way conceptually, trying to find the middle between extremes of, okay, how much of my personal belongings should I get rid of? Or what should I keep? To navigate the middle way is to just address what is in front of us without immediately jumping to a position about it. That sometimes we do observe asceticism. We go into solitary retreat. We spend 10 days, 20 days, 30 days in pretty austere practice. Or maybe it's just half a day. Maybe you come to all day with Soka Koji. Maybe it's just 30 minutes of austere practice of holding still and meditating. But I feel that the Buddha's encouragement, and just coming out of this idea of Rohatsu, the Buddha's realization, would just be very tentative of what modality you use to direct your practice, what modality I use to direct my practice, and see if that we can't connect with a basic intelligence, which is not knowing what is arising in front of us, or seeing that we feel like we know, but to observe that with the same curiosity is something we've never seen before. It's, as Sokuzan says, it's an intention. It's a practice. I loved it when I first started learning how to chant morning service. that was a reminder Sokuzan gave me often, was it's not a performance, it's a practice. Buddhism is never a performance. Meditation is never a performance. Chanting is never a performance. Giving a talk is never a performance. It's a practice. So we endeavor to extend ourselves to everything that arises as a practice. What is this? We sat through the 3 periods of the night once. I did it once, and I said, I asked Soka, I said, I don't want to do that again. I said, I'll sit for 9 or 10 hours again, but if I could do it during the daytime, that would be preferable. Shoka's done it a few more times. I think he did it maybe once or twice after that. And I think similarly, well, no one's sitting through the night anymore except Unyo, a few times a week for all of us. Sewing or reading about Amy Goodman or Greg Sutton. So Rohatsu, we acknowledge the Buddha's realization, not a realization that needs to be distanced or separated from us right now. We don't have to long for a day where we could have lived with the Buddha, but to actually live with the Buddha now, live with our teacher, with our Sangha, with the manifestation of the Dharma as it's showing up right now. To consider the example of the Buddha in the middle way, not as prescribing how we should function or how we should act, but encouraging an intelligence to look deeply at what is arising moment by moment, to return despite our discouragement, to return for the benefit of others, to return for the benefit of others. I would be happy to take a few questions if there are any. Yudao.
You said what modality, you said to pay attention to what modality you use to direct your practice.
Yes.
What's an example of a modality you would use?
When we try to laminate any form of concept or teaching over our experience, instead of using the concepts and teachings to introduce ourselves to our experience. So when we reframe everything we do in the form of Buddhism, when we reframe everything in the form of psychotherapy, we reframe everything in the context of how this looks to me or how others might perceive me, we're using an idea to try to navigate a situation. And it's through this idea that we manipulate, we meddle, we interfere before even looking, because the modality, the framework prescribes action. It tells you what is wrong and what is right, what's correct, what's incorrect. And so we immediately start to adjust based on our identity as a Buddhist, our identity as a man, as a woman, through our age, through our experience, through our job. Instead of using what are incredibly profound teachings, supportive teachings, we take the leading edge in a sense, that we don't have to lead with our concepts, with our thoughts, but we can use these concepts and these ideas to help us go deeper into what is arising. So anytime you notice justifying or explaining experience through any form of thought, this is leading with a modality. A really tangible example that Sokuzan would use is how we label. It's very simple. It's not a complicated modality. It's just language. But when we label an experience as the example he will often use is depression, I can resonate with that quite a bit. Where we leave it at that. I have depression. I'm depressed. And there's no further investigation, because the leading edge is the concept, and we don't have to look at what is beneath that concept. So it happens on large levels, our political identities, our global identities, our national identities, and it happens on an incredibly small scale as well, just through simple naming. Neither are incorrect, neither would just disappear if we saw the truth. Those could be utilized perhaps more fully when we're not tied down by them.
Thank you.
Are there further questions?
A question.
Yes, Benjamin.
When you told the story about the Buddha, and he was asked, what will bear witness? And he touched the ground, right?
Yes.
Why did he touch the ground and not like point at the sky or something? Or would that have worked too?
That's a great question. And to be very direct, I don't know. I can't give you a really solid answer on that. I think there's something very practical and tangible about the earth. We walk on it, we function in the midst of it, and it's connected to everything that's occurring. It's perhaps a romantic way of talking about it. But like you're saying, you probably could also use the sky. You could have perhaps touched a tree or something else, but the earth is what he pointed to, and it's called Sparsha Mudra, that gesture of the Buddha just taking his fingertips and very just the fingertips touching the earth. Thank you for that question. Shoto.
Shoto bowing. You said something like return to practice for the benefit of others.
Yes.
Is that something that we have any awareness of, like how that benefits others? Bowing.
It's even better than that. You don't have to have any idea how it benefits others. It's the intention. Your intention is to be a benefit to others. And we can tell ourselves a story, although we may not be able to see it. And the very simple story is that we train our minds so we don't project our negativity onto others. I think we see some of that as we begin to notice it before it arises or comes out. As I talked about last week, the Buddha said something similar in praising those who practice for themselves before practicing for others, and that they have to have some understanding of how their consciousness is functioning, how their delusion is arising and falling. But I do feel it's simple enough to return to that intention, just returning to the intention, practicing for the benefit of others. And that may come and go in different strengths, but I don't know that you need to do this, but you could sometime. You could actually take a minute or 2 minutes once a day to actually look at somebody in the Sangha. We move so quickly past one another. I do. Andre helped point that out to me today. I don't have a talk because I haven't had a chance to do anything yet today. But what does it mean to have a Dharma sister? What does it mean to have a Dharma brother? And what is your intention in even living in community? Because you could do this by yourself. You could come see Sokuzan every day, and you could go home every day. Or you could not show up every day. There's people that are on Zoom every single day. They show up every single day to participate. And so I don't know that it has to have an answer, but you could reflect on that intention as it's connected to our vow, the Bodhisattva vow.
Shoto bowing. If I can't find that intention, or if that's just not showing up at the moment, is just getting back to the cushion the same thing?
I could go along with that, but I don't know if I would agree with you in saying that it's not showing up. You may not feel it. You don't have to feel it. It is not a feeling. It's not a desire to be of benefit, like, oh, I feel like I want to help others. So the intention does not need you to feel like that's burning in your heart. For some people, it does. It was asked about that. I've never been through a Jukai ceremony where I don't cry. It's never happened up to this point, except for yours. I didn't care about that. No, I cried during yours too. And it doesn't mean anything. So I have a feeling. But you might think like, oh, because he has feeling, it must mean understanding. It doesn't. It's just crying. It's, I don't know. It's sometimes I watch, Rumi was watching Pokemon today and I started to tear up.
You're pregnant.
What's that?
Nothing. I said you're pregnant.
I hope I'm not pregnant. So I would just, when you say, what if the intention doesn't show up? And if the intention completely just dissolved, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't put up with this. So just, yeah, to come back to what you asked about, we could also say just your willingness to return to the cushion is that gesture, is that intention. Navid.
Navid bowing. What is the 3 periods of nights that you just mentioned? Bowing.
I wish I could give you a better, it's been so long since I read about those, and I'm lucky I even remembered that. And I don't know what they represent, but it's literally like 9 to midnight and midnight to 3 and 3 to 6. And but I'm sure there's some traditional symbology there, symbolism. I apologize, I can't say more about that.
Navid bowing. Do these periods represent something?
Probably, yes. And I imagine it, believe it or not, my go-to source is Wikipedia. And you can find sources out from there. That's a great hub to look into more in-depth articles. So you could actually look that up. And I think
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Adriana, Sokazan.
Just quickly, is that the one you're referring to, the one where they would say that's the hour of the dog or the hour of the cat?
I think, isn't there 6
Something
in a day?
I don't remember it either, but it's some kind of a dynamic that has a certain kind of thing where, well, you shouldn't do that on the hour of the dog because.
And I also, if we were to talk to Sokuren, I think there's some in Chinese medicine times, and then they're associated with organs or functions in the body. And yeah, I don't know. I want to say, Adriana, it's so good to see you, and I hope you're doing well down in Florida. Munyo, did you have a question?
When you're bowing, it's kind of the insertion. I want to go back to Shoto's question about doing good for others, but I think what you said before that part was to return in spite of discouragement. So what if you find discouragement is overwhelming and that returning seems impossible? Bowing.
The returning can take a lot of forms, and I don't think we should just confine it to showing up. That our intention, similarly, it's not defined by how we feel. It doesn't have to be defined by our activity either. So to return may be just not to abandon whatever pit we're in. I think that is part of what's so confusing about the path, is that it encourages you to utilize whatever is arising in consciousness as the path. We're never asked particularly to resolve what is arising, to get beyond, to go to war with, but to see that the very thing we need to look at cannot be deprived from us. And so therefore, no matter how contrary it feels to our thoughts of what the path should be, of what the intention should be, the returning should be, in Buddhism, at least as it's been taught to me through Sokuzan, as I understand it, it's always what is arising. And it's a little bit of getting used to the disappointment. And we may never get used to it, but we can persist, I think. Undo.
Wonderful. Is there anything we can do as Sangha members to support each other in persisting, bowing?
I've been feeling pretty strong about this lately. You can help from being an asshole to try to do that. You don't have to feel the action. you can actually see what needs to happen. And that seeing can actually be contrary to how you feel, but you have to see. You have to see. And if you don't look, you can't see. We just collapse into our opinions, our preferences, our stories. It's very hard to see. But when we do see, it may be disappointing to see that what you acknowledge, what you look at, what you see has to happen, not conceptually, but you just see it, can actually be completely contrary to how you feel. Because you've not gotten rid of anything. You can't derail the causes and conditions that continue to flow. But you see that those causes and conditions can't interfere with anything. But when we latch onto them, they obscure everything. They obscure the very thing we need to look at. And so I think being very intentional to consider the vow, we shouldn't just take it and be complacent with it. We recite it every day, several times a day. We recite the Bodhisattva vow when we start the day. We recite the Bodhisattva vow through the 4 vows. In a sense, through the 4 immeasurables, we're reciting the Bodhisattva vows. And to just look at how that becomes just words, and we never are intentional anymore about considering that the people that I look at on a daily basis are the very people I've vowed to liberate. Sometimes we get this abstracted idea of the Bodhisattva going out into the world and saving beings, that we don't acknowledge the beings that are in front of us. We don't need to go looking for suffering. It's in the rooms, it's in our families and our workplaces. So put a little tension on it, if you can, and don't go catapulting the other way and becoming artificial. I'm not saying that you should start acting in a way contrary to what's sincere, what's genuine. But I would say that any one of us, if we've taken the vow formally or informally through participating in this Sangha, we could start with the people that are in front of us and endeavor to intend for their well-being. Yashin.
Bowing. Are our discouragements a form of testing our commitment to the path?
No, discouragement is just natural. It's just arising. It feels like it's inevitable. Some of us have more of it than others. Some of us face obstacles the rest of us can't imagine. But it's not a test. That kind of implies some sort of intelligence that's looking down and seeing what you need and what you don't need and putting pressure on you. But what happens is, because the discouragement itself is so difficult, we want to rationalize it. So we create a story that makes it easier to receive. There's something that makes receiving from the teacher a lot easier, and it's in part because of the dynamic we set up through our story with the teacher. You're my teacher. I will do my best. I will try to receive this. But have somebody that you have no respect for do the same thing, and you become very indignant. So it's not the gesture, it's the way in which we manipulate and position those in our ideas of how things should be. It would be a lot easier if it was just a test, because you'd pass it. You'd be able to pass that test.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jishin. So cool.
So Corinne Bowing, you've mentioned that breath work is, you have a liking toward breath work.
I do.
And it's a paramount teaching in some of the other meditations. How is breathing a teacher in the Zen tradition? Bowing.
I don't know about in the Zen tradition. I can go back as far as Hongren, the fifth Chinese ancestor, and he was known for teaching more mindfulness and awareness practice. So often we hear strictly the awareness aspect of their Zazen, but going as far back as Hongren, he was utilizing the breath to teach his students to begin to calm their mind. And as Sokuzan has said, that may be valuable for a lot of people. Sokokoji is so pointed in its intention. And there's so few places where you can receive a teaching like this that it shows up more individually as opposed to as a blanket. I think some of my enjoyment around the breath is more biological and just connecting with the parasympathetic nervous system. Is that the resting part? Yeah. Just giving my chance when you live a life that's so busy, so hectic, so chaotic, and we don't realize that the sympathetic nervous system is constantly engaged, constantly being antagonized. That very simply, just like watching South Park or going for a walk, sometimes it feels nice to breathe. It doesn't have to be framed in a spiritual context. This is what I teach primarily at the library of the teens, is that they don't need to practice Zazen yet. They could just learn how to breathe and see that that may be of benefit to just getting through the day, getting to sleep at night, being able to pay attention in school a little more clearly. So it's a situational thing for me.
Sonhabowing, along those same lines, do you teach unplugging from overstimulation?
I don't teach other than what you've heard me teach. But I think that's a nice thing to do too. I just deleted Facebook from my phone today. And scrolling too much. So yeah. Mozuku.
Mozuku bowing. The Mora story, or the Rohatsu and the story of being tempted or challenged. Can that be understood as something that shows up on the path that we might be able to relate to more directly or more personally?
If I'm following you, it's just the encouragement to include that you don't have to go to war, that you could include the negativity. This shows up. It's kind of an archetypical story in Buddhism. The other really famous one would be Milarepa in the cave. And he's haunted by the demons with the big saucer eyes, and he fights and he does magic, and eventually he offers them a cup of tea. And that seems to, he stops going to war. If you stop going to war, what war can there still be? And I want to acknowledge that's kind of an idealized situation. It doesn't work in every situation, but to just look at how much of our warfare is created through just pushing our own opinions. Milka.
Milka bowing. What do you celebrate on the path?
I don't. What do you mean by celebrate?
Milka bowing. We were talking a lot about discouragement and not believing, not disbelieving, a lot of don'ts. So celebration almost seems like doing something that's, I don't know.
We celebrated
something.
We celebrated my 10th year of being here, and that felt nice. That was pretty huge to be sitting in this room for 10 years. This May we should celebrate. Unyo will have been ordained for 10 years this May, and Senshu will have been living here for 10 years. It's a little thing, but to just appreciate that. I think some of us probably remember the day we move in on a yearly basis better than we remember our birthdays. There's something that's kind of moving about that. You could appreciate that. Appreciate when you met Sokuzan. The Order of Immediate Light, we celebrate when Sokuzan established this situation as a separate order.
Milka bowing. It comes up. Today is my 5th anniversary since I received Jukai.
You received Jukai and Rohatsu.
Yes.
Wow. Wonderful. Oh, we should celebrate. Did you bring a cake? Unyo, did you bake a cake? Me either. Never make the cake. Adriana, did you have a question?
Bowing. How do you relate to the idea of immediate light? Bowing.
I think it resonates a lot with what I've said about not getting out of the pit. That the immediacy of the light is not in opposition to anything. It's not like something that's going to stand out as light as opposed to dark. It's not that traditional archetype of good and evil. It's immediate. It's always the case. It is our heartache. It is our joy. It is our mundane making toast. And we don't have to repeat that. We don't have to hold that as a concept in our mind, but we could acknowledge everything that shows up in front of us with our attention. I think that's our generosity by just receiving it. And that image really is quite strong for me. The order of immediate light, the temple of immediate light, that's really a strong part of this. And Sokuzan's teaching style, as you know, you've been listening for years, is very much about immediate. Like, see it, look at it, it's right in front of you. It's not, here's the 10 steps you need to take. It's sit down, see for yourself, and you don't need to see something other than what's showing up. And that we fight with that for so long because we want it to be something other than the craziness or the spinning or the mundane. And so maybe we just need to keep hearing that message, keep hearing Sokuzan saying, no, keep going, that's it, look at that. That's immediate light. Take another question or two if you'd like. That's silly. If you'd like. I could take another question or two, or we could close. Sokuren.
Sokuren bowing. Does living in Sukukoji for 10 years bear fruit? Bowing.
No. No, not like, oh, if you live here for 10 years, this thing happens. It was just it's a nice thing to do. It's like when Rumi turned 5, that's like when you become a big boy, right? When you're sweet 16. So living for 10 years here doesn't bear fruit.
6 more to go.
What's that?
6 more to go.
6 more to go. My sweet 16. Thank you. We're going to have a sweet 16. I feel that in all the years I've been here, I feel that I meet people that come here and already have more insight than I had after 5 years or 10 years. So we can't really measure our practice in the length of time we've sat. But celebrating doesn't always make sense, but we still enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing it sometimes. Thank you. Stand and dedicate the mirror.
The 3 times, saw the summoned once. Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, the great Prajna, Gita.
O Buddhas, Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukochi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
I'm going to put up the whole thing in a hallway. Actually, oh, yeah,